Hello, Julian Schwartz with JJW Productions, and this is a 1981 Ford LTD Crown Vic. It is the oldest car that I have ever reviewed on this channel, and it is definitely the most pristine old car I have probably seen in a while. Now, before I go further, I would like to thank my coworker for allowing me to review this car. He actually inherited it from his grandparents at the beginning of the summer back in May, early June. And as soon as I saw they had, I was in love with it. The Ford Crown Victoria, it's basically a flagship for Ford, and it's probably the longest running car in Ford's lineup. It started in the early 80s and lasted all the way to 2001. A little bit of background on the Ford Crown Victoria. It started out in the 1950s, in 55 and 56, as the Ford Crown Victoria. Then Ford dropped the name for about 20 years, until 1980 when Ford redesigned the LTD, and they decided to bring the Crown Victoria name back as the top-line trim level of the Ford LTD. There are a few differences between the regular LTD and the LTD Crown Vic, mostly with the features and the options that it has, the Crown Victoria being the top-line trim, whereas the LTD just being the regular car. Then 1983, the LTD and Crown Vic split, Crown Vic becoming its own model within Ford's lineup until 1992 when the LTD name was actually dropped and Ford just kept the Crown Victoria, in which it stayed until 2011 when the car was officially discontinued. Now, regarding what I was saying with the LTD Crown Vic in the early 1980s being a trim level instead of an actual lineup car, there are a few things that you can see that make this a top-of-the-line car. For instance, it has a partial vinyl roof, not a full vinyl, just the back half. And then there are a few different things on the outside that make it a little bit different. For instance, on the taillights, you have an LTD badge, which was actually taken off in the mid-80s when the Ford LTD Crown Vic truly became a lineup in Ford's lineup. And then you also have all power seats. You have power windows, power mirrors, which is actually very rare on an early 1980s car. Now, one thing that's kind of cool is the massive engine in this car. Usually I don't look at the engine compartment in cars, but because this is such a big one, it requires a massive engine to move it. Not to mention, this car is made entirely of metal, so it needs a large engine like this to help get it moving. Now, according to my coworker, this is a 5.8 liter engine, so it is definitely massive. It has 4 spark plugs on each side, so it's kind of interesting. It's also interesting that the way that they did the hood latch, instead of having a hood prod or like they do now with some hydraulics, instead they have coils on each side, and they're old as hell, but it's really cool the way that they did it. Now, a really cool thing with the 1980 LTD is you might notice that there's no Ford emblem on the front grille. Now, where it actually is right here in this top corner. It's kind of hard to see, but it's kind of cool that they don't have the blue oval. Now, on these earlier cars, they had them down in the bottom corner, but on the LTD Crown Vic, they decided not to do that. Personally, I think it looks kind of cool and kind of ties it in with its cousins, the Lincoln, as well as the Mercury. So you can't quite tell what it is unless you actually know. Now, one thing that is kind of cool and actually unique with this car, like I said, this is owned by my coworker, and whenever I first saw it, we noticed there were initials on the door handle, and we weren't sure what it was, and then we figured out it's actually his grandfather's initials. So it's kind of cool that he put those in to customize it, and it's also very unique with this car. Now, one cool thing about the early 1980s sedans that I will always love is their massive trunk. Now, as you can see, this is the spare tire, and it's up on this second shelf. But there's still so much more space down in this area. Currently, my coworker has some old CB radio equipment. There's even a fire extinguisher back here, which is pretty cool. And without all this, you could easily fit a couple bodies back here. This trunk is so massive. I'm not going to try it, but you could do it. Or if you're someone who likes to go golfing, you could easily fit at least 3 golf clubs back here. Like 3 full bags of golf clubs. Now, something that's pretty cool on the early Crown Vic is actually the side window here. Now, at the time, this was actually for the police cars and a way as a police car for them to put their spotlight in. But on the cars that weren't police car optioned, it's just a side mirror, and it's one of the few things that is not power operated. It's using a knob on the door, which the passenger side also has one. You just turn it to the right, and it opens up. Cool thing with this old car is the light switch itself. There's a button on the left-hand side of the steering wheel, and you just pull it out to turn the lights on, and push it in to turn the lights off. Kind of simple and also kind of cool. I'm not sure if it's unique with just the LTD Crown Vic or if it was something that's standard on cars of the 1980s, but this car does not have a horn in the steering wheel. Instead, it's actually on the turn signal stalk on the left-hand side, and you simply push it in to activate the horn. Kind of unique and also kind of cool. Else that's kind of cool is that this car comes with cruise control. Now, this is something that is also very rare on early 1980s cars, and it's actually the only button that's on the steering wheel itself. To turn the cruise control on, the button is on the left-hand side, simply on or off. And then on the right side, you have the buttons for set acceleration, coast, or even resume for the resetting the speed. So kind of cool that this car has something such as cruise control. Now, something that I've always loved about the old 1980s cars is just how simple they are and how cool the dashboard looks. For instance, this one has a nice wood color for the trim, and then also just all the old-fashioned stuff that it has. For instance, for the time display, you have physical buttons for setting the date, and the time. And then for the stereo and the AC system, the air conditioning system or the vent system, it's down here, and it's just switches that you can push to activate everything. So kind of cool with how simple everything is in this car. Something else that's really cool with these old cars is the fact that they are 6-seaters. Now, something interesting with this one, it does have the front bench seat, but unlike other cars that have bench seats, it has 2 separate ones, 50-50, instead of like 60-40 or a full bench. Now, because of that, the middle seat is actually split, and in the middle seat, you do have armrests, which are on both seats. So kind of cool that it does have armrests, and it's kind of cool that the seats are split instead of being connected. What I said is pretty cool with this car is that it has semi-power mirrors. I already showed you on the driver's side door, the switch is on the door itself, but for the passenger mirror, the switch is actually right next to the steering wheel, and it's located in an interesting spot. So it's kind of cool that you adjust the mirror from this switch here instead of on the door itself. But it's actually pretty cool because you don't have to reach over all the time to adjust your mirror. Thing is actually the gas cap itself. Instead of having plastic all around it, it's just a metal gas cap, which is what you would see in a modern car without all the plastic around it. So pretty cool that this has that. What is it like to drive and ride in the 1981 LTD Crown Victoria? Well, for this portion, I actually have the owner of the car, my coworker Josh. He's going to be the one driving this because I do not trust myself with it yet. So we're going to just cruise around the neighborhood and see what it's like to drive in such an old car. Now, from your ownership of this, how's the drive been so far?
Well, it drives like a boat, but the one nice thing is it has nice suspension. So it drives like a boat, but it also feels like a boat. So it's not really bumpy at all.
Yeah, it definitely does feel like a boat. Like, I've driven my dad's Chrysler 300, and I thought that thing was a freaking boat, which for today's standards it is. But back in the 1980s, this was actually the standard for cars. So they were this size, if not sometimes bigger. So kind of interesting. Yeah, it definitely has a decent pickup for an older car.
Oh, cul-de-sac.
Yeah.
Probably gets about, I'd say about 10 to 15 miles a gallon.
10 to 15?
Yeah, not too.
That
one? Well,
yeah.
we can keep going.
Yeah.
So not very good on gas mileage.
Yeah. Well, it is a large sedan and 1980s, so they weren't really looking at gas mileage back then.
Worried about the luxury.
Exactly. Which this thing is very comfortable to ride in. It has cloth seats, but it is very nice to sit. The seats are not stiff. Turning radius of this car looked at.
It does have a large turn radius.
Yeah.
I guess that's it being such a big car, but
yeah. So it's explanatory. Now, as far as interior of this car, his grandfather, who originally owned it, has kept it very clean. It was garage kept. Never really seen any rain in the last, what would you say, 20 years?
I'd say about 20 years, maybe even since I've been alive. I'm 30, so maybe even 30 years.
Yeah. So it's very well kept. It's a very nice and clean interior, and it's in very good shape for being a 1980s. Now, usually these cars, half the time they don't drive, or half the time they're kind of beaten up. So it's very nice that this thing is still in perfect shape. Obviously, mechanically it does have a few issues, but it's to be expected.
A little slow on the idle, a little hard to start.
Yeah. Which, thankfully, this thing is an automatic transmission, so thankfully you don't have to worry about a clutch or a manual trans, so there's that.
I don't know if the radio has a good sound. It doesn't have a bad sound for me.
Another interesting thing for 1980s car, the radio is very pristine and has a very decent sound, as you can hear. So it's kind of nice that radio is still operational after all these years.
The one suspension on the front left is probably going to go bad in a bit, but still, for one of the shocks being a little bit bad, it rides really nice.
Yeah, I can definitely tell, and has a very smooth ride. It's not as bumpy as you would expect, but it's an old car. So, ride's nice for what it is. And so, that is the 1981 Ford LTD Crown Vic. Now, for an early 1980s car, this is absolutely pristine, and I have to thank my coworker again for allowing me to film it. And also, for an early 1980s car, even though it doesn't have too many luxury options that you would find on today's cars, like a navigation system or Bluetooth, it does have a lot of luxury options for its time, with the power seats, the technically power mirrors, but not really, and also the fact that it is a full six-seater car, which is kind of nice. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button down below. If you have not done so already and you wish to do so, please hit that subscribe button to stay updated on my channel to watch future videos or watch my past videos. Until next time, I'm Julian Schwartz. Take care.